Welcome to UberCube, the podcast we discuss all things cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka UberBear, and I'm joined this evening by my other host.
Hi, I'm May, also known as Myagic.
Yeah, and we got some cool news to start out with tonight. Both May and myself have been fortunate enough to have our two cubes featured at CubeCon 2023, where we hope to see all of you there. In my case, it's my horror cube. How about yourself, May?
My fake cube got selected, and I hopefully will see some of you there to come play it with me, so we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. And when votes come out next week, I'm still got some more in the contention here. I've got, we'll do a couple shout outs real quick. We're going to do a little bit of business in the front. I've got UberBear's Artifact Cube going up. In addition to, we've got our good friend of the show, Sandwich. He's got his Peasant Cube. And yeah, so if you could look out for both myself and Sandwich, that would be really awesome. We'd love to see both those cubes featured. Sandwich's Peasant Cube and UberBear's Artifact Cube. We've got a really interesting topic for you tonight on how to look at your subtypes with some very particular cards as our feature focus through a different lens. But before we do that, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube, and we're going to have our drinks or libations of the show. May, what are you having this evening?
I'm having a Juniper and Oak Cabernet Sauvignon. I'm being a bit of a wine snob today.
Nice.
It is just
I am not. So. I am having a single malt scotch by Glenfiddich. They have a beautiful Caribbean cask rum that I'm in love with. Or tasty. Rum cask, pardon me. And it is a tasty.
I mean, I like rum.
So let's get over to the yeah, I like rum. I like scotch. So it's a nice combination. So we have a particular card that we're going to talk about, and we're going to use that in our examination as kind of the featured card of this episode. May, would you mind reading off this card to the audience and telling them what it does, please?
So, we're going to talk about Harmonic Prodigy. It is a 1 and a red human wizard creature. It is a 1/3 with prowess, and if an ability of a shaman or another wizard you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time.
Kind of innocuous. First thing I see is, prowess, right? 1/3 prowess. We're pretty adept at the idea of what prowess does. But it's something that you would easily overlook. What we want to really focus on in this episode is a couple of components of this. She said it was a human wizard. But the biggest deal is here is if an ability of a shaman or another wizard you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. And the focus of this episode is examining your cards through a different lens, as in something like this might look rather benign. It would be easily to overlook this card. I didn't. I think it's a wonderful card. I actually feature it in my Femme Fatale cube. However, if you're going through your collection, sometimes you might pass this card along thinking that 1/3 with prowess just isn't enough ability when I have something like a Monastery Mentor, etc. at my fingertips. So we're going to have May kind of examine this card through a different lens. Normally, like I said, if you're perusing through your cards, this one might get pushed to the side and easily replaced with like a Monastery Mentor, as we said before. Whereas there's a lot more depth to this card. And May, would you mind kind of breaking it down for the listeners so that they can see this through a different lens?
Sure. So when it comes to designing around whether or not your subtypes matters, you can kind of look through what your cube currently has, and you might be surprised how many wizards you're already currently running, or how many shamans that you're currently running, that already have those triggered abilities. And this could be anything from ETBs, anything from upkeep triggers, to attack triggers, combat triggers. Like, this is a card that I've considered for the fake cube a couple times, because it's just, like, a good budget card, and it overlaps shamans and wizards. What I particularly like about it is that when you have it with some other form of value card that you might already be playing, like, say, Ardent Elementalist, which is a 3 and a red human shaman, 2/1, when enters battlefield, return target instant sorcery from card from your graveyard back to your hand. Something like that's already playable for a lot of cubes. You might already have something like that for a lot of cubes. And it's super easy to be like, not only do I have just a 1/3 prowess for 2, but I also have this Ardent Elementalist, which can really cement that theme of, this is spell slinging. This, if I have both, then I can get an additional instant and sorcery from the graveyard, and really pushing that value. And when you're looking at what your subtypes are and whether or not that's relevant, and what that percentage is in your cube, and how many of those cards are relevant, it can be a good way to expand your value assessment for certain cards, and I think that this card is a perfect showcase of what all you can consider when putting a card in, more than just, this is just a 1/3 prowess for 2, but rather, this can be a benchmark for your shamans or your wizards. It has that really cool overlap and a really cool synergistic theme with those ETBs, upkeeps, etc.
Yeah, so what's interesting about this card is it's dual role, and it would be easy to overlook it. Yes, prowess, so very spells matter, non-creature oriented. But the double triggers, with the cards that can sometimes be considered, the effects can be considered ancillary, or perhaps they're secondary, or they're tertiary, and you can glance over Meta Breeze. And what's interesting about a card like this is it can get better with time, like a fine wine. You might have, on your initial build of your cube, have no value. That's perhaps your density of shamans or wizards or these effects simply aren't enough to justify its inclusion. Perhaps you were using it for the prowess effect alone. But over time, as you get all these different various sets that come out and the iterations and updates that you do as a curator, you might find that suddenly the value expands, that the density, the opportunity for triggers hits. So with something like Prodigy, I want to go over some examples to kind of enlighten the audience on what this card could potentially do in a lot of different type of powered environments or synergy environments, unpowered, thematic builds, etc. It has the opportunity. So I wanted to point out a few cards here just to kind of examine what would interact with that type of effect. Being more clear on it, if an ability of a shaman or another wizard you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. So, for example, one card in particular that would hit pretty hard with it, and I run this, and the next three that I'm going to talk about are particularly in my Femme Fatale cube and do justify the existence of the card on top of the creatures, or the non-creature spell prowess triggers, are Ashling the Extinguisher. For 2 colorless and 2 swamps, you get a legendary creature, Elemental Shaman. Whenever Ashling the Extinguisher deals combat damage to a player, choose target creature that player controls. He or she sacrifices that creature for a 4/4. So if you had the Prodigy on the field, the Ashling trigger would duplicate basically twice, and you get a 2-for-1 on that. And that's just one really strong synergy. May, would you mind taking on this next one, Delina the Wild Mage, please?
Delina the Wild Mage is 3 in a red for a legendary creature, Elf Shaman, and when she attacks, you may choose target creature you control, then roll a d20. If you roll a 1 through 14, you can create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of that creature, except it is not legendary and has exile this creature until at the end of combat. And if you roll 15 to 20, you create one of those tokens and roll again. And what I particularly like Delina this is that Delina is a card that you might already be running as your kind of top end, I wouldn't say aggressive, but kind of that value pick anyways. And that it can hurt extra hard when you're more often than not getting 2 creatures guaranteed, and then sometimes getting that additional reroll to get even more.
Yeah, and that would be on the attack trigger this time around. It's on that initial attack trigger. It's when the Prodigy's ability would trigger and resolve and cause Delina to get on the first dice roll. If I'm not mistaken, if the audience listening and anyone has any feedback on that, I'd love to hear it. But as you can see, Ashling and Delina, both of those, one was when it deals combat damage, so it was combat damage trigger. And the other one was whenever it attacks, so it was the attack trigger. And then the next one we're going to talk about is the Elvish Visionary. And you get, for 1 colorless and 1 green, you get a creature Elf Shaman. When Elvish Visionary enters the battlefield, draw a card for a 1/1. So when it ETBs, you get an ETB trigger, and that would cause, with the Prodigy out on the field, for you to draw 2 cards. So that just wanted to show some of the causality that you would have with having an interesting card like Harmonic Prodigy on the battlefield whenever these other creatures do their work, right?
So when we examine Scryfall, it shows us about 100 cards where the text includes enters the battlefield and is a shaman and is available in paper. And it is pretty relevant to know that even though that it's only around 100 cards, is that a lot of those cards end up in a lot of cubes anyways.
Yeah, so that was more of the 100 shaman, and I disseminated it by whether or not they have a trigger, so there will be a certain amount of those in that subset that may not interact with it, so you have to examine the cards on whether or not it has an upkeep trigger, or whether or not it has a attack trigger, or a combat trigger, or a enter the battlefield trigger,
right,
or some other type of trigger that may or may not occur.
And the fact that it's 100 cards that's just enter the battlefield is already a pretty good start. So
Yeah, because they have, over time, they've eroded cards and whatnot. The next one that actually has a much higher density is the Wizard. And a lot of those, there's about 259 of them I found that had either the word enters or some form of text that said it would trigger. And that made this even more enticing. Now, granted, that's a huge spectrum of cards. That's all across all colors and colorless of Magic. But I see the opportunity in there for something like Harmonic Prodigy to really have a payoff if you examine the density within your own environments to see if there's payoffs. I went a little further and got some weird ones that I thought was interesting that fall underneath the shaman, just to spread the wealth across all the types of cubes, right? So one that I thought was wildly interesting was Aki. We'll go with Aki. Blizzard Herder. For 1 colorless and 1 mountain, you get a creature goblin shaman. When Aki, the Blizzard Herder, is put into a graveyard from play, each player sacrifices a land. Now, and you get a 1/1. Now, I can see where this would be pretty ruthless, but when it died, you would get a death trigger, and it would potentially fire off twice if you had the Prodigy on the field. I don't know if that's a good thing, but if you're not at parity, it's pretty bad for the opponents, and you can manage it. A next one, May, would you mind taking on this next weird one?
Sure. The next one is Bloodhusk Ritualist, which is 2 and a black for a creature vampire shaman with a multi-kicker for black. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card for each time it was kicked. What I particularly like about
I've added this to the list. When I added this one to the list, I may have to challenge this one being on the list. I'll have to do a little bit more of a judge call out to think how the multi-kicker actually, it's an additional cost that goes into it. But I believe this hits and works for the Prodigy. So I'm going to ask for a little bit of audience. We're going to have some audience feedback on some of this. We're getting into some wild and crazy interactions here. So I believe that this will hit, but I'd be curious to know. I'll look for the audience to give some feedback on this one. What do you think, May?
I am pretty sure that it would just trigger an additional time because it is still triggered ability unless multi-kicker's an activated ability and we know we're both just wrong, but I'm fine being
okay.
wrong.
I will own my wrongness. Sometimes being wrong is okay.
It's cool. So.
Yay! The next one I have is Young Pyromancer. For 1 colorless and 1 red, you get a 2/1 human shaman. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, put a 1/1 red elemental creature token onto the battlefield. So for each cast trigger, you get to make an additional elemental. That's very practical considering that the Prodigy's in the same color, so I can see those synergies hit pretty good. May, would you mind taking on this next one, please? It's a Pyromancer all grown up.
I also just wanted to add a little, extra note, is just say that what's cool about cards like Young Pyromancer is, again, it's a card that is going to see a lot of cube play anyways. It's already going to be in a lot of environments, and when you're considering a card like Harmonic Prodigy, it's easy for you to look at some of these cards that you already have and just really consider it, because Young Pyromancer's already good on its own, and then it just gets better.
Well, it did, because it became Seasoned Pyromancer.
Exactly.
It stayed in the smoker a little bit longer and came out a ripped college graduate.
Goals.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, for real. Yeah.
Seasoned Pyromancer is a 1 red for a human shaman. When it enters the battlefield, discard 2 cards, then draw 2 cards. For each non-land card discarded this way, create a 1/1 red elemental creature token. And it also has the secondary activated effect of 3 red, exile it from your graveyard, create 2 1/1 red elemental creature tokens. But that's the least relevant part of this.
Yeah, so you can see we're kind of bringing this back to the Harmonic Prodigy, bypassing that prowess trigger that's powerful all by itself, but really following up on that if an ability of a shaman or another wizard you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. You can probably really get the brain spinning here a little bit, seeing all the opportunity within your environments by just doing a simple search on either Cube Cobra or Scryfall to see what your density of either shamans are, and shortly coming up, wizards are. A next one, this is a oldie but a goodie, and just one of the most consistent cards ever. Eternal Witness. For 1 colorless and 2 forest, get a creature, human shaman. When Eternal Witness comes into play, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand for a 2/1. That's an ETB trigger that'll double down. You get 2 cards for a 2/1. That's great value. When the Prodigy's sitting on the field, hanging out, holding whatever piece of 4x4 she's got in candles. I'm not sure what's going on in this image, but yeah, she's really thinking on a rock. There's some more interesting shaman.
Like Reclamation Sage, it enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact or enchantment. It's just a 2/1 elf shaman. That's something people already play. Woodfall Primus is a bit more of a niche one for a lot of cubes, where it's 5 green for a Tree Folk Shaman with Trample. When it comes into play, destroy target non-creature permanent and has Persist. It's just a big, stupid 6/6 Treeful Shaman that destroys something. That's already a really good card that might be in some
cubes. And those are the ETBs. Yeah, and the next one I picked out I thought was interesting to also work with the Prodigy would be Ignoble Hierarch. And for 1 green, you get a Creature Goblin Shaman. It's a 0/1, but it has the ability, obviously, to make Jund colors, but it has an Exalted trigger. So whenever a creature you control attacks alone, gains +1/+1 until end of turn. Well, in this case, you would get double Exalted triggers, which is really interesting. So it's just a side benefit that sometimes might get overlooked. So that kind of wraps it up. There's so many shamans, so I encourage after this episode that everybody just peruse your cubes to see what is your shaman density. And we're going to talk about what that density would look like as we move forward. But now we're going to move over to the wizards in correlation with talking about Harmonic Prodigy and that secondary ability. If an ability of a shaman or another wizard you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. May, would you mind covering the first wizard, at least by namesake? Most of these people would know this individual.
I mean, it's Snapcaster Mage. It's just 1 blue, human wizard 2/1 with flash. Enters the battlefield, target instant or sorcery in graveyard gains flashback. And the flashback is equal to its mana cost. It's a classic. There's a reason that it's so famous for what it does.
There would be cost embedded with that one, right?
Exactly.
So this is probably, truthfully, not the best target, but if you had some Ponders and some Preordains, or let me correct myself, yeah. If you had the ability to cast some cards that were of lower mana value, I could see purpose in having the double triggers. You know,
Sure.
You'd have to maybe do a little bit of a la carte on this one, if you will, right?
I guess we might need
the next one,
Judge Colin because it does specifically target. So,
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to ask for a judge on any of these because I'm examining these cards and some of these I'm going through and I'm making this list. So I'm all about being honest with you here at UberCube. We are about the feedback. So if we come across a card and we examine it in a way that doesn't reflect what we were saying, feel free to hit us up on the Discord or let us know because, learning is part of doing the podcast. So we are definitely taking a little bit of risk in doing this episode because the complexities of a card like Harmonic Prodigy and gauging the triggers and when they enter the battlefield or on attack and the timing rules involved, it can get very complex. So as I walk through these, May and I may be treading through a minefield right here, and we're willing to accept that.
Yeah.
But at the very least, right, even if we're right or wrong or indifferent, right, as we call these cards out, what we want to do is have a thought-provoking episode about the examination of your subtypes at a higher level, right? Look at your cards and look for advanced interactions that sometimes might be secondary or tertiary, and you may have overlooked it for a period of time. And as your cubes mature, you're going to want to look for advanced lines of play. And something like Harmonic Prodigy does really provide the aspect, in my opinion, to cube environments. This next one is really interesting, and it would be comfortable working because it's based on ETB, would be Ether Channeler. And it's not as present in a lot of cubes. You'll see it in a lot of high-powered vintage cubes now. It's become kind of a bit of an all-star in my cube, personally. But for 2 colorless and 1 blue, you get a creature, human wizard. When Ether Channeler enters the battlefield, choose one. Create a 1/1 white bird creature token with flying, or return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, or draw a card. And you get a 2/1. What's so interesting about that idea is that you could basically double one of those effects. May, would you mind taking away this next one, please?
I've actually never seen this card, believe it or not. It's called Spellseeker, and it's 2 blue.
What?
Yeah, I know, crazy. It's a human wizard 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an instant or sorcery card with converted mana cost 2 or less. Reveal it and put it into your hand. Then shuffle your library. That I like. Yeah. I've legitimately never seen that card. I don't know why I've never seen it.
Yeah, I run it in my powered vintage cube, and I also run it in my La Femme Fatale. To be completely honest with you, it's powerful. I just haven't seen a lot of performance out of it, but I do enjoy the card very much. It has hung out in both those cubes.
I think it really depends on what your pod is doing, because, my pod adores being able to just tutor and build that kind of toolboxy playstyle, and Spellseeker is something that would go into that kind of toolboxy environment that I would want to support anyways. And being able to double that up with your Harmonic Prodigy is really good. So,
yeah, and we've got a couple of them here that they're known to the community. Something like Solar Temptation. Basically, when it enters the battlefield, it takes possession of another card as long as it's on the field. It would trigger essentially twice on its ETB trigger. Then you got one that could get pretty gross here. It's Venser, the Shaper Savant. For 2 colorless and 2 blue, you get a 2/2 legendary creature human wizard. Flash. When Venser, the Shaper Savant enters the battlefield, return target spell or permanent to its owner's hand. This card is infamous for it's even got its own Venser lock tethered to the name of it. So you could see where something like Harmonic Prodigy combined with some other effects, blink effects, and ephemerates and whatnot, you could get some pretty gross stuff going on. So just wanted to point that out. The next one is, I love this card. It's one of my favorite cards of all time in Magic. It's Dark Confidant. Yeah, oh yeah. And the reason why we're mentioning Bob, Dark Confidant, is it has a beginning of upkeep trigger that hits, and whenever it does, you reveal the top card of your library, and you put that card in your hand, and you lose life equal to its converted mana cost. You can see where something like this, it's a risk it for the biscuit, but at the beginning, you get the beginning of the upkeep trigger, you could potentially double those triggers with the Harmonic Prodigy on the field. May, would you mind taking on these next two, please?
Sure. I mean, you definitely have one of my closet favorites on the list is Dreadhorde Arcanist, which is 1 in a red for a 1/3 with Zombie Wizard with Trample. And whenever it attacks, you may cast target instant or sorcery from your graveyard with converted mana cost less than or equal to its power from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If it would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. Big fan of this card. Again, it's just really good for your red decks anyways. I think that it should be in a lot more cubes anyways, but it is the perfect example of, here is a wizard that you're already playing. It overlaps all of your miscellaneous shamans that you might already be playing, and it perfectly shows how the Harmonic Prodigy can tie these things together by just adding this one card by expanding your view of your cube.
Yeah, it's looking at it through a different lens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't exclusive to Harmonic Prodigy. The whole point of this is showcasing a card that does a thing that may have went unnoticed, right? I do realize there's some, like Ryan Sachs, I saw that he actually has Harmonic Prodigy, I believe, in his build-around cube. I saw that on his list at one point. Like I said, I run it my La Femme Fatale. It's not like this card is completely unknown to the community. It's just when you're examining something, you oftentimes get hung up on that primary ability, in this case, Prowess, which is a fantastic one, but it gets outweighed card slot in your cube environment by something you think may be more powerful, but maybe, just maybe, you overlooked the shaman and wizard ability and the density of creatures that actually do things when they attack or upkeep triggers or enter the battlefield effects, etc.
Right.
That you can actually get double mint gum out of it, right? The next one we have, it's a new one. It's Airtide the Resurrected. For 2 colorless and Dimir, you get a legendary creature, Phyrexian Human Wizard, 3/2. Flash, whenever Airtide Resurrected enters the battlefield, choose up to 1. Counter target spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. Its controller draws a card. Destroy another target creature or planeswalker. Its controller draws a card. Now, granted, this wouldn't be the best value add because you are, in fact, potentially loading the 2 cards in your hand, but you would be taking 2 things off the field. So this might be a net neutral card, zero-sum type of idea, but I put it on the list because the whole point of this is to realize that it is, in fact, a wizard, so that you can cross-compare your wizards and your shamans to the idea of something like Harmonic Prodigy and see if it was a good fit for you and your cube environments.
And I'll add again, since it doesn't have the Harmonic Prodigy doesn't have the problem-solving text that choose new targets for that additional trigger, you might have to let us know in email or whatever, or on Twitter, whatever, that it would just trigger on the same target. You can let us know. We are willing to be wrong.
Like I said before, we are willing to be wrong. What the purpose of this episode is not to be right on all the interactions with Harmonic Prodigy. The purpose of this episode is examining the primary, secondary, and tertiary effects of cards at a higher level. And as your cube matures over time, or you make changes to reevaluate the density of certain effects in your environment to see if interactions have been overlooked. So that is the big takeaway from this, not the precision as to whether or not we got all these interactions correct. Like we said, we're willing to. I'll eat crow. I'm okay with it. But I think I probably got 85% right, and I'm okay with that. So the idea was that examination of Harmonic Prodigy. But we're going to move over to another card that's a very famous creature subtype, and it's going to be human. And this one's been talked about before on other podcasts, but I kind of wanted to examine this another level, and do a cross comparison. You'll see what's coming here. So Champion of the Parish, fantastic card. For 1 planes, you get a 1/1 creature, human soldier. Whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on Champion of the Parish. So this has been looked at by a lot of cube curators over time. And human density hasn't come up. It's come up more times than not, right? So it's not a new idea. I do run this in my HorrorCube environment. I don't really run it in other environments, but I wouldn't fault somebody if they're running it because the human density is so prevalent. May, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. When we're comparing the kind of expansive, the subtype matters cards and trying to overlap your importance or whether they're going to be relevant for your cube, something like Champion of the Parish can be an easier consideration compared to Harmonic Prodigy, because what makes Champion of the Parish strong is that humans are already so dense that it's a pretty easy include of, I am already going to have a ton of humans because it just naturally happens because of the amount of density that exists, versus when you're thinking of Harmonic Prodigy, you kind of have to expand your view a little bit, look through a different lens and be like, okay, how many of these relevant targets do I already have? Or is it worth searching for these other cards? And is it worth including because of those other relevant cards? And even though it's a lot more narrow, you can get a lot more interesting effects compared to Champion of the Parish. But Champion of the Parish tends to come up a lot because it's easy.
Yeah, so I did an examination of my HorrorCube, which is going to be featured at CubeCon. Thank you, CubeCon. And it has 62 targets out of my 360 that are of the human subtype, right? That's 17% in my HorrorCube environment.
Right.
So, audience, if you're asking yourself, what is my level of inclusion before I will allow something like this to come in my environment? Typically, for me, it's 12 to 15%, right? Anything greater than that, I know that's a little bit of variation there, before I will justify the existence of said card to qualify that this is a good enough effect that I'll allow it in my environment. So the fact that 62 targets will, in fact, interact with that card is pretty gravy. The next thing that's interesting about it is humans, as I think Stu mentioned this in a previous episode, and it's kind of a very known, I'm doing a Captain Hindsight conversation here, but humans expand to all 5 colors, right? I mean, so the opportunity cost is very low to run this in your cube. It will very much hit these triggers, very much have the opportunity to get bigger and bigger. And even though it's a vanilla creature, you could see the potential of something like this to get out of control very quickly if unchecked. May, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do, because I actually have a curveball for you.
Do it.
There is actually a reason that I prefer Harmonic Prodigy and that kind of effect compared to Champion of the Parish, even though Harmonic Prodigy has a much lower density of an available card pool. Champion of the Parish is easy to put in because it has so much density that ends up in cubes anyways, but if you don't have enough humans, then you just don't care about it. The line is very strict, as opposed to Harmonic Prodigy, where, say, if you have a Subtype Matters theme for your cube, all of a sudden, I now have a way to bridge that gap between my shamans and my wizards in a very clean way. Versus Champion of the Parish only cares about humans. There is no overlap. If you have humans, great, it's probably in unless you're concerned about power. If not, then it's probably out. It's very cut and dry. As opposed to Harmonic Prodigy, it forces you to actually consider what's in your environment. When people are drafting it, they can take context clues from the pack of, is there a way that I can use this secondary? It gets their Johnny brain turning. It gets those gears making smoke.
I have something to add to that. Yeah, I have something to add to that, because if you saw how May and I were treading ever so softly through the triggers of the shaman and the wizards, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here and claim that came with utmost confidence while we were discussing these, wondering like, did I just put this on the list? Did I make a mistake, right? I can confidently tell you whether or not that's a human or not. So I think for me, and I think this is kind of what you're trying to say on Mark, is the complexity level of the first one is much more interesting, right? Mm-hmm. The synergy is more rich, whereas this synergy is, I'm a human. Hi, I'm Chuck. Okay, cool. I'm going to get bigger. And that's about as hard as it gets, right? And it didn't matter what color. You didn't have to have any kind of limitations. So, yeah, I would say that this card is fantastic. I run it. Other people do. But I wouldn't say it was kind of a no-brainer to not have my humans challenge my vampires, werewolves, zombies, etc. Mm-hmm. This card was just going to be an instant payoff. But not a lot amount of thought into it. I can get a 6/6 or a 7/7 vanilla without trying too hard, just by playing the human faction within that environment.
Like, it's definitely not a bad card. I would never suggest that it's a bad card. But
no.
When your priorities as a cube curator is this what I want for my environment, or does this encourage Johnny players? Sometimes that's just the things you think about.
And by the cross comparison, we gave the numbers for the shaman and the wizards. To put it this way, when you're looking at that higher, so when you're looking at the subtype of the humans, and I did a Scryfall search, there's 3,177 printed to date, right? Versus when we saw the other, it wasn't even close to that margin combined when you're looking at that level. So you can see the ease of which Champion of the Parish could slide into a cube. But I'm on Team May with this one, that the depth for me isn't there. I include it because, it benchmarks a certain type of play lines that some people in my environment want, but I would never say that this is complex, an interesting card. I'll just say this is a big old beater that has value for a very efficient rate.
One thing that your players will always appreciate is when you give them the opportunity to find their aha moments. And the Harmonic Prodigy allows your players to find those aha moments, because they'll look at that base value and be like, all right, it's a prowess 1-3, that's great. But then, all of a sudden, they're like, oh, I already drafted some of these other shamans or some of these other wizards that already match what I'm trying to do anyways. Now I'm starting to build a theme. Now I'm starting to build a deck. Aha! And
yeah, I would agree with that. The synergy for the one
is... it starts getting interesting.
Oh, yeah.
And then once you have Champion of the Parish as an example, it's, I'm already drafting all these humans. Aha! I already have all these things. But the extent of when that happens is a lot less drastic because your options are much more vast. I need to consider the percentage of humans in my deck in order to play Champion of the Parish. It's just, do I have enough humans? Yes, no.
So taking that vastness into comparison, where we talked about Champion of the Parish and how it expanded across 5 cards, we've benchmarked another card. This is the Champion of the Parish didn't quite make it. It's Champion of the Perished. And for 1 swamp, you get a creature zombie. Whenever another zombie enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on Champion of the Perished. You get a 1/1. So, what's interesting about this card in particular is it's not as prevalent as the humans, right? Zombies as a faction simply don't outweigh the human faction. As a matter of fact, I ran the numbers. Hold, please. Zombies quantified at about 556 cards where their type is labeled as zombie, whereas we had well over 3,000 with the term human. In addition, the qualifier for this one, and it is powerful, but I chose to exclude it from my horror cube, if you're asking yourself, is because zombies typically only cover 3 colors on the spectrum. We've got Esper, if you will. Mostly Dimir is the primary color set. And then on rare occasion, when we had, was it Amaket, where they started making zombies in the color white spectrum. So, as they've done with the vampire.
As a bit of a note, if that's okay. There are 107 cards that are not zombies that create zombie tokens.
Yes, which does expand upon that. So what do we get as a grand total there? So we still haven't even hit.
It's still not even close to humans. Like, humans was just how many humans exist as a type. The zombies and things that make zombie tokens as a whole aren't even close to that.
Yeah, so I got a little lazy, and I did my horror cube, and it was 27 targets, and I put 360 excluding zombie token makers. That's where the lazy came online. But then I put, we'll estimate 36 targets of 360. That equals about 10% of the environment. So I kind of did a little bit of a fudge factor there. I'm an engineer, but I didn't feel like engineering math that day, I guess. But, yeah.
It's an easy thing to overlook. It's fine.
So what we wanted to take away from that is look at the depth, going back to Harmonic Prodigy, and the interactions, just the interesting lines of play that come from such a thing. Back to the prowess, yes, but if an ability of a shaman or another wizard you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. That is complex. And I find that a lot of drafters do really enjoy that level of complexity. And it gives that hidden added value when they come across these shamans and these wizards. Now, again, not to scoff at the Champion of the Parish, but you can see whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, see my tone, put a 1/1 counter on Champion of the Parish. It's neat. It's cool. I love the card. I run it in my horror cube. But it doesn't have that pizzazz. Is that what I'm looking for here?
Well,
but it's still a super
Prodigy,
relevant.
You're having to consider 3 different aspects. How many shamans, how many wizards, how many of those have triggered abilities, as opposed to how many of these are just humans.
But it does make you evaluate your cards on a different level. So humans are kind of, if you were a new cube curator and you wanted to find a nice card that would very much have a strong early game, maybe late game, Champion of the Parish is a win, right? If you're looking forward to up your level of play, and increase the opportunity for your players to push that level of their Magic game, you could see where Harmonic Prodigy would push that level harder. And actually, I would probably say that Champion of the Parish, rest his soul, I do not include him because the density simply isn't there. My Horror Cube, it's very confined to the Dimir color subsets, where I'm only running a 360, so it's a density factor, whereas Champion of the Parish has the whole cube at its disposal, right, to get an opportunity.
So I actually wanted to add another curveball, surprise, and I wanted to talk a bit about when it comes to expanding some of those creature types to, say, Winota Joiner Forces, right? Where it's 2 red and white, legendary creature, human warrior, 4/4, whenever a non-human creature you control attacks, look at top 6 cards of your library. You may put a human creature card from among them onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. It gains indestructible until end of turn, and put the rest of the cards at the bottom of your library in a random order. Winota's great. It sees a play in a lot of higher power environments, and it is the perfect, my subtypes matters. How many humans, how many non-humans, and how likely am I to hit Winota? And what's clever about it compared to, say, Champion of the Parish is that it expands that kind of how many humans do I have and adds that extra layer to how many non-humans that I have. Added complexity like that is a very organic way to get your players to not only just have those aha moments, but to kind of build within the restrictions of the decks that they're trying to make.
I would agree with that 100%. Drafters, you've got all kinds of different drafters at your table. And if you have to sprinkle a little bit of complexity to your cube, I understand. But sometimes you want to put a lot more density, more opportunity for your players to expand their, spread their wings and their ability to play Magic a little bit better is what I'm trying to say, so many words. And if you really want to challenge your drafters, running a card that has like Winota or Harmonic Prodigy could really test the skills of your players. And maybe it won't be for everyone that's getting passed around the table. Maybe, they'll see it's prowess and I don't need that. I'm not running a, non-creature. But those couple of players get that aha moment that May was talking about and they realize they can get those double triggers. You start seeing some really good decks put together. May, kind of in a final thought mode here,
Sure.
The whole idea was to kind of look at your cards from a different lens when you're going through your collection. And also, I would say to refresh and look at your cards more often than not, right? You and I stew through cards more than we should. So, but if you've got that, if you're blowing the dust off your cube and you want to see if some new cards came out, you can look for opportunities like Harmonic Prodigy. And perhaps it does have secondary, tertiary, or it may be ancillary abilities that connect to your existing card base, right? So that's kind of was the point of this episode, is to examine those subtypes at a much higher level. I run the percentages, and this isn't like a perfect situation or a perfect math, but I really like to see, when I'm going to do a card inclusion, to look for some type of synergy, like Harmonic Prodigy. I want to look for about a 15% opportunity, basically cost of decision, if you will, right?
Right. I
want to make sure that when that card comes in, it has the opportunity to impact the game and not just as a standalone card. But what's interesting about Harmonic Prodigy, its standalone has prowess. At the very least, it could go into a Spells Matters deck or some kind of non-creature synergy. That ability to get that ETB is just icing on the cake, but it's really powerful, interesting icing. That's what I love about this so much.
While I don't think that there is a precise percentage for everybody, there is an advantage of knowing your percentage and knowing how likely that deck is to come together. And when you can keep that in mind as a curator, it's how much you're going to foster these types of decks, how much you're going to foster those aha moments, how much you're going to foster these deck building moments for your players. And when you keep that in mind, it gives you a chance to reevaluate your environment in a way that you might not have before. And what's really cool about these subtype interactions, especially with Harmonic Prodigy, is that it gives you an opportunity to reevaluate and really appreciate some of those already good cards that you might not have already thought about, like, say, Formation Stage in the Fey Cube. They're elves. They may not be the party that I'm looking for, but they are elves. And that's why they're a consideration for that environment. Or with humans and Champion of the Parish. Or with, again, the wizard shamans for our Harmonic Prodigy. And when it comes to evaluating your environment, it could be a really fun way of just kind of looking through, figuring out what the percentage is, how many of those aha moments that you're going to be encouraging, and then maybe kind of get a rough estimate of how often people are going to be able to actually draft and play this deck.
Oh, yeah. And you can also be like May and I, and then tread ever so slightly as you're calling out these triggers, wondering if you got it right. And that's okay, because a card like this inspires thought in the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
You may have some players that are uncertain about these triggers and whether or not that is going to be the impact. But I think something like that does increase the discussion during a game, and does by proxy increase your ability to learn how to play Magic the Gathering better and become a better drafter and a curator. So that's kind of the cause effect of adding cards like this.
Right.
Is complexity also breeds creativity, in so many words, right?
Right. I was just going to say, there is just also sometimes for design goals it might be a cost. You might be trying to specifically stay at 360 and trying to say, what is my opportunity cost for throwing in Harmonic Prodigy over some other 2-drop 1/3 prowess or 2/2 prowess or whatever? And when you consider your opportunity costs, sometimes the percentage of cards that you might already have might reward you for having Harmonic Prodigy, and that's something that you consider. Sometimes it's not worth the costing that slot, and sometimes you just don't have a cost because you're just going to throw it in and see how it goes. If you don't like it, take it back out. All of which are valid.
All right, so let's kind of move over to final thoughts. Hopefully we didn't screw up this Harmonic Prodigy thing too bad. We're going to get all this hate mail. It's going to be great. It's fun. All right, so basically the point of this episode is to look at your cards through a different lens, in so many words. That's what we're trying to say here. Seek synergies, triggers, abilities, secondary, tertiary functions of your Magic cards, and even cards that have maybe over time become unnoticed or just gotten to the corner of your room, or my office in my case, that may now have advanced synergies because of the innovations that Magic the Gathering has had over time, the introductions of new cards and the new sets that we get every 3 weeks, that maybe cards like Harmonic Prodigy now have value add. And then on that same token, we know that, for example, Champion of the Parish will always be a good card because humans just keep getting printed.
They're going to keep
And what's interesting, if you have to put it on the same scales, Champion of the Parish, it's growing, right? I mean, zombies are continuously getting printed. That card's playing catch-up. It doesn't have that value add yet, and it may in some environments, very specific. But at this moment in time, if you're playing kind of a broad-based cube, Champion of the Parish will eventually catch up just through printings alone. That's what's interesting as you see these cards. Other than that, May, this has been fun. Kind of did the thing we talked about. We walked through, we tread ever so slightly through those triggers. We'll see if we got it right. The audience will let us know, I'm sure. You have any final thoughts?
I am out of curveballs for you. How fortunate for you.
Yeah. Yes, I made it. All right, so we're going to move over to our socials. If you love the show, we would truly appreciate a 5-star review on your favorite player. It would really help expand the audience. It gets us out there for the whole Cube world to see, and others to bring them into the fold of this cool thing that we all love called Cube. So yeah, go on your favorite player, hit us up. We would love a cool little write-up. Also, UberCube is an affiliate with Alter Sleeves. You can use our code for 5% off your purchase. www.altersleeves.com/UberCube/. And I love Alter Sleeves. Now that I've got the Horror Cube being a feature cube at CubeCon, I'm going to be looking at getting some cool Alter Sleeves added to that just to showcase them. And hopefully I can get my Artifact Cube in there too. And I'm going to try to convince May to get a couple of these sweet Alter Sleeves as well, just because they bling your cube out. If you want to support the show, please use our Inked Gaming affiliate link, where you can get playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, etc. Custom and large volume projects are available. It says that. I don't know why I have that in there, but it's on my list. Anyways, you can also find us at Twitter, at UberCubeMTGPod. You can reach us at UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. You can also link us on Discord. And our Discord's getting pretty big, isn't it, May? We're having some good conversations.
It's also been getting a lot more active. It's been nice.
Yeah, I've been evangelizing a little bit. I'm a little guilty of that. I'm like, hey, come talk to us. But that's okay. And May, do you want to tell them about the Patreon?
Tell us about the Patreon. I don't know anything about it.
All right, moving on past Patreon. Other than that, this has been really fun. Thank you very much. Now we're going to say the thing that we always say here at UberCube is
Happy
Cubing, Shamans and Wizards.
There we go, I got it.
Wizards. Bye.
Bye, everyone.